Okay, so this is more or less live, and the way I like to start these off is where we tell people why we are here, sort of who we are and why we're talking to each other as it relates to this conversation. So I try not to go on too long because I say it every time, but my channel is supposed to be about me improving me first and foremost. Hopefully, other people find it beneficial to watch it and take part, and if I, have by proxy get some of the benefit. I think it keeps it more honest and humble if I focus on what at a particular moment in the conversation I'm interested in, what I think would help me. I try to keep my audience in mind to some degree. And I'm interested in talking to you because for years now I've been trying to understand what the experience of what I will, for the moment, call gender dysphoria is like, what it's like for people who try to come up with a solution to it, what solutions they try. And I'm interested in as much as possible, an unpolarized sharing of perspectives about it that takes into account both of our perspectives. And I get to some degree, I'm interested in surrounding issues, but the first and foremost is just what's it like, and just trying to look at it. I was going to say reasonably, but I feel like it's hard to explain what reasonable is. Anyway, so I found your channel through a curious series of events, and I found your approach is exactly the kind of thing that's useful to me. It may be you talk in a way that is less commonly heard or maybe never heard more publicly in more mainstream media. I don't know that that means it's unusual, but it means it's unusual for me to hear it. And uh, so I will bear that in mind. But yeah, so I was interested in what your perspective was, and it's very understandable to me. The way you talk makes sense to me, so it's an easy way to it helps me understand. So even if it turns out that your perspective is more unusual, it's still a useful entry point for me to help understand the issue. I just wanted to note that, and I better stop talking. So over to you.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. When you sent me a message and I watched your intro, I felt that same, mutual understanding there that the way we go about learning and processing things so that we can mature and grow is very similar. And I do agree very much that it seems to be kind of a rare thing to be able to have a space where two people can talk about issues that are maybe sometimes considered taboo or difficult. You can strip away all of that social anxiety, I guess, and strip away even your own personal ego and just look at something from a really objective perspective. And through my entire life, really, it's been about education. I've always enjoyed being able to talk with people and share ideas because I think one of the most rewarding things that you can see, at least for me, is that light bulb moment for somebody when you're talking to them and something finally clicks, and all of a sudden, things seem, I don't know, just much more. They're less fearful. They have less anxiety about it, and they move more freely in the world, and that's that kind of freedom is something that I'm constantly searching for, for myself and for other people. Just that very grounded security in just understanding things. And that's just the way that I go about on my channel, especially. I put it out there so that people like you or anybody can come and watch, ask questions, engage, and not be afraid that they're going to offend or some other social anxieties, that they can actually have a space to learn. So this kind of thing is fantastic. I very much appreciate that kind of back and forth dialogue. Just for education's sake, really. And you may call it unusual or morbid curiosity, depending on on what it is you're talking about. But for me, it's when you make things taboo to talk about, it creates way more problem than actually just talking about it. So,
Yeah, and that there's an idea I've had. I don't know if it's quite right, but for a couple of years now, which is that you can approach, for example, stuff to do with sex and gender, um, in a way it's perhaps natural. At least it feels like it is for me, where I live on the planet, um, to approach them with an aura of taboo, and that makes things more intriguing but harder to think about. Um, and so partly in a sense, I haven't found a good way to express it. What I want to do is to make these topics completely boring. Like we talk about it so much. We ask all the silly 12-year-old questions. I probably won't do that so much, but potentially like just completely go through it. And YouTube's pretty good for this. This is one of the problems is that as I do what I'll call research, it's not always research, but as there's so much I can learn on YouTube that I kind of already gotten through a lot of that 12-year-old stuff on other channels. And so it's something I'm trying to balance, is trying to come at things afresh at the same time that I try to study them. So anyway, but yeah, that is definitely the taboo thing is very much something on my mind. So there was something I wanted to ask you before we get started. I got an email from YouTube recently, which I don't know if everyone with a channel got. And one of the things they mentioned is that they reserve the right to put ads on everything. Had you heard of that?
I have, yeah. I've watched a few other YouTube creators talk about that. That they don't have to monetize your channel and they don't have to ask any kind of permissions. That they can just advertise it.
Hmm. I've seen ads on your channel, which seems peculiar to me. I mean, yeah,
Really?
I mean, because I mean, you're a bigger YouTuber than I am. And so I don't want ads. I don't think ever, because if nothing else, their production quality is way higher than mine, and it just looks weird. So I was thinking, I printed off a list of the things that you're supposed to keep in mind if you want to be advertiser friendly. And I thought, if the more unfriendly we can be, the more we can scare the ads away.
There you go. Cool. Yeah, no, that's a good
Um,
idea.
yeah. So, are there any of these things you want to do, like strong profanity or inappropriate language, violence, gore, sexual fluids, adult content,
Oh, we could
dangerous?
talk about adult content. Certainly,
Well,
we
yeah, 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 yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, that covers a lot of stuff. Medical procedures,
right, right.
inappropriate pranks, yeah, drug related, tobacco related, firearms related. I can't do much for that, but I did make sure
Yeah,
to have alcohol bottles everywhere.
yeah. There you go.
So
Sure.
this is gin, um, vodka.
There you
They may
go.
or may not actually contain alcohol. They may just contain water, rum, um, but yeah. So
Oh
that'd be.
gosh.
But no, I'd
Yeah,
actually.
YouTube is being heading in a direction. In fact, shortly I'm considering doing an announcement video and slowly filtering my things to other channel or not other channels, other platforms because I see where this is going with YouTube. I'm not a big fan of it, so I there may be an announcement coming here in the near future where I'll still be putting things up on YouTube, but it won't be the only thing that I have there.
Yeah,
There will be other platforms.
I don't blame them for doing what they're doing. It was free for many years, but I think it could really throw a loop in the mood that I'm trying to create. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
anyway, so I just thought that was a funny way to start. Anyways, okay, that's that. Okay, one thing again, one last preliminary. I have on my screen it says Artemis, and your channel is Tea Time with Artemis. Is that your original name, or have you chosen it?
Nope. So that is my chosen name. Yep. And that's a whole nother topic as far as dead names go.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot more for me. There's a lot more hype around that than there needs to be. If we can go off on a side tangent about that really quickly, if you're curious.
I'm always curious, but I'm wondering at the beginning it might be peculiar, especially for people where this is a pretty new thing. I will put a note so that we get back to that because I'm definitely interested in that. Somewhere. Uh, okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I was just curious, and was wondering, but I don't want to derail things too early. So what I'd like to do is just go along biographically, if you don't mind, whatever you think is relevant. Or I know, no, rather than leaving some people confused, how would you describe yourself in terms of sex and gender, since that's what we're here talking about?
Yeah, so I've pondered at length about this, and I'm sure there's still much more pondering for me to do. But as far as my sense of self and gender, so if you want to look at the physical markers, so I have no problem reckoning with the biological truth, which is that I was born a fully functional biological female. That's never going to change, and I don't have serious such serious problem with it that I need to convince everybody that I am man or male, that I want to change my birth certificate to reflect as such. It doesn't go that far for me. I recognize that it's a spectrum for transgender people, that they could be more on the spectrum that I am versus somebody like Jammy Dodger, who's a YouTuber very well known in the trans community. He went as far as to get bottom surgeries and to change his birth certificate to male, even though he was born a biological female. And that, I would say, is probably the far other end of the spectrum that I don't occupy when it comes to transgender. I recognize biologically I'm female, but everything else about me gender-wise, when I say gender, I mean more of my personality expression, my energy, all those things is very, very masculine. So I would say for me, I often use the term on my channel. If I have to use a label, I use trans masculine to indicate the trans part, that I started off as something opposite, so female or feminine, transition to something that's more outwardly masculine, but that's not biological and it never will be. So that's kind of what I've settled on, and that's really just how I see myself, more or less just a very energetically masculine person.
Okay, that works for me. So then going back to your past, like sometimes people say that this starts for them when they're 3, 4, which I find amazing and hard to understand. But um,
Or
in your case, like I leave it completely open. I know you think and talk a lot about it, so I don't think I need to prompt you any more than that.
sure, yeah, no, the one video that I did about this, I think it was somewhere around 20 minutes long. So, but essentially, for me, I did not have a whole lot of self-awareness, and I still have to work on that as a skill, which I think is kind of a masculine sort of trait, not to be super self-aware. But I I don't actually have any memories before I was 7 or 8 years old. So for me, what I do remember is that I did at a young age want to dress and act more like a little boy, masculine, but I don't think at any point I ever said I am a little boy trapped, that whatever these parts are, I don't recognize them. It's supposed to be something else. That wasn't part of my experience, but I did from a young age dress much more tomboyish, and just did more masculine type activities. Otherwise, yeah, I don't have that severe dysphoria that, like you said, some people at 3 or 4 years old, they just knew it was something, there for them. It really didn't occur to me to look into that or question gender or anything else until much, much later in my life, when I actually, short, short story, spent a good portion of my life just trying to fit into what I felt was just normal and what maybe was expected of me within my family, and was in a relationship actually with a male for 12 years, which that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a long time. I'm
A
just.
long time.
Can you say a bit about your, without saying too much, a bit about your family and the town,
Yeah,
city,
sure.
wherever you grew up?
So I had a very, very strong male influence for a father, a now retired Marine, and mother was a stay-at-home mom. And in general, feelings were just not something that was talked about a whole lot, at least not with my father anyway. And my mother has always been awkward about things that she finds difficult to understand. So there wasn't a whole lot of room for open dialogue discussion on things. And she has always been very, very uncomfortable with homosexuality, period. Even though now that everything's out, she has said, I would never have disowned you. I would never, that's okay if that's you. But as a kid, I always saw her awkwardness and distaste for that, and just never bothered to question anything beyond that. I just tried to fit myself in the mold that I thought my family and my parents wanted of me, and I never questioned it, to my detriment. And then went 12 years in a relationship with, not so ironically, a pretty feminine male. And that was always awkward for people on the outside to see. And now going back and examining everything, it makes total sense to me why that was able to limp along for as long as it was. And all the warning signs were there. I just never questioned it until one day I hit a breakdown when I was 27, I think. I remember where I was when it happened too, sitting on the floor, staring at the ceiling, just thinking, there is something very, very wrong, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. And that actually, part of what contributed, I think, to my breakthrough was that I had actually been on birth control that entire time, very young when I went on it. And I'm a firm believer that hormones will absolutely change certain parts of you. They dictate certain parts of your personality or your behavior. And for me, having that huge surge in feminine hormones was really messing things up for me. It was bad. So when I went off it, that's when everything just came crashing down and my life changed seemingly almost overnight. Within a couple of weeks, go ahead.
So chronologically, am I right that that relationship started when you were 15?
Yeah.
So it's 12 years from 15. Okay, so is there anything more to be said about that you want to say? Like that seems rather remarkable to me just to start a relationship that early and stay in it was like a one of the.
Sure. There were ons and offs for periods of months in there, so it wasn't a consistent. It was more or less also a relationship of toxic codependency. So he had a lot of family trauma, and apparently to some degree, so did I. And it just seemed that with masculine and feminine aspects, it just worked in a very toxic way until I started to unravel all of my own traumas and start doing therapy, and then again kicking myself off of hormones. So yeah, it was, and again, like you said, remarkable for 12 years for somebody to be involved in a relationship. If it had been a healthy one, from that early on, sure, I can imagine that being unusual, especially for young people, but it wasn't. So it was really just it worked by circumstance. Perfect storm, I guess you could say.
Okay, I was going to ask. It just the idea that popped into my head was that being in a 12-year relationship would be a way to keep other people away. Um,
Essentially.
but it sounds like that maybe wasn't really what that isn't relevant. I don't know. It was just a thought.
Yeah.
Um,
No, yeah, it
if
was
if you thought he
toxic.
was notably feminine and therefore was you'd be more comfortable with, and then to stay with someone like that, even if other things didn't work, would yeah. But
Yeah.
okay, so you mentioned. I'm asking this because it's a question that should be asked. It doesn't have to be answered. Um, you mentioned trauma of your own, and I have heard that in a connection with gender dysphoria, actually. So, is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, so I right off the bat, I will say that there was absolutely no sexual trauma whatsoever in my life. I actually would say, relatively speaking, I had a good childhood. I had a mom that would stay at home, and a dad that, aside from being in the military and being very verbally colorful with his language, especially when he was angry towards his kids. Otherwise, there wasn't what people would think of as active abuse. It was more a lack of being able to talk about emotional things and the support in that way, I guess. That and then coupled with the fact that I was, if you want to call it lesbian, fine, that's probably the correct term. Not being able to come out with that fully, that caused a lot of emotional handicap, a lot of crippling for me. That without being able to work through all that was kind of what led to me staying in the closet, proverbially, technically speaking, for so long. But outside of that, I mean, the trauma was just, I guess, again, having parents that emotionally were not mature themselves. So some things that happened were just handicapping in that way. But otherwise, a lot of people associate sexual trauma, like some form of molestation or something like that. There's a high incidence of that with people who are transgender. I didn't have any of that whatsoever. So it's a little different for me in that way.
Okay, because I had heard that it could. I don't know how common this is. I thought it was considered to be fairly common, but it's hard to tell what is actual accurate information or statistically relevant. Was that for girls that they would, at least in one instance, I know anecdotally, that that would make having early abuse would make being stronger appealing, and would, for right or wrong, associate that with being male, and so that would be something that would appeal to them. Um, so okay,
A defense mechanism,
yeah.
absolutely.
I understand that it's a bit peculiar, perhaps, to ask about the lesbian years when that may not be what you think of yourself ultimately. But you, as far as being in the closet, I'm curious what experiences come to mind when you say that. Since that sounds like you didn't clearly think of yourself that way. So what was?
No. Yeah. Well, I had in high school. There was a friend of mine that and again, this is a testament to how lack of self aware that I was. That I didn't even know at the time that I actually had feelings for, that they were even sexual feelings for at all. I was with this particular friend. We spent tons and tons of time together. And it came out one day. I think her mother realized, or at least thought, that there was something going on, which sexually there was nothing going on. And she confronted us about it and was very, very nasty. And I was such close friends with this person. She was terrified and was not lesbian herself. And so there was a traumatic break in the friendship, and this happened in high school. And at that point, I learned, at least I thought, that being homosexual or anything related to it was very, very bad. And at that age, so this was, right before I got involved with this guy that I was with for 12 years. And I think that was part of the reason I said, okay, homosexuality is really bad. Let me find somebody that's appropriate, for me. And that's how that happened. But that experience kept me from having any homosexual experiences all the way until I was 27 years old, 26 or 27 years old. And so I was in the closet that entire time, engaging in sexual activities that, because of the hormones that I was on, led me to actually want some of those. But then when I finished, I was always just disgusted with myself, and I couldn't figure out why. And I developed this hatred for sex even for a while, which is also terrible. And just it didn't click, even though it seems pretty obvious to the outside. It just didn't click to me that, hey, you're a lesbian, that's okay. And nobody had ever said that to me either. And I, grew up in a pretty sheltered situation as well. Small military community, that sort of stuff in the military, don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. And then went to a rural school where, we had, I think, 2 black kids in the entire school, and nobody ever talked about being gay or lesbian. So a very, Christian kind of thing. So it just continued on, again, perfect storm through my life. So I didn't actually have my first lesbian experience until I was like 27. So, and that's when it clicked for me. I was like, oh, okay, this is what I am, and this is what's right for me, what works.
Right. So something just clicked for me too. You're 33 now, right? So that was 6 years ago. Like, it wasn't that long
Yeah,
ago.
no, not at
Oh,
all.
so I'm listening to this like it's some distant past, and then I know it's
No,
not.
no, no, no. No, I have come a million years from where I was, even just 5 or 6 years ago. Even to me, it's pretty remarkable. Some people, it takes them their whole life to arrive at some of these things, but I have gone through some pretty intense restructuring, you can say, and finally reorienting to what I have been all along. So it's been a very interesting journey of self-discovery.
Yeah. So what was I gonna say? Um, I don't remember what I was gonna say. Um, so is there anything else about from there to here that comes to mind as being, well, okay, no, you mentioned that one, as far as in the closet experiences. You mentioned that one thing with your friend. Um,
Yeah.
so you also mentioned something about Christianity. So would that predominantly the mood of the school, even, or
Of the school, yes, but it wasn't a Christian Catholic. It wasn't anything like that. It was just a rural school where religion was pretty common. But yeah, no, we didn't grow up with it. We didn't go to church or anything like that. My dad actually made a point not to do that because his parents had sent him to vacation Bible school, and he resented that quite a bit. So he made sure not to force that sort of thing on us. So we grew up largely without religious influence. So that didn't have too terribly much to do with my earlier formative years. It just helped keep me further constrained in my adolescent years, I guess.
right. Now, it wasn't that long ago, so I would think like the broader culture was relatively accepting and encouraging, wouldn't you say? Like in
The
entertainment.
broader culture, if I had been more exposed to it, and I think if I had come out in high school, probably would have been okay. It was just the fear that was instilled in me from that experience with my friend's mother, that I did not feel like questioning any of that in my broader social circle at that point. Um, yeah, it just it was enough for me not to question it. And as it turns out, there were a couple other of my classmates who later in their lives did come out as gay or lesbian. In my class of 200, I think there's probably 4 of us. And I don't think that's an insignificant number for such a small class, but none of them came out during that time either, which I find interesting.
Hmm. I do wonder. I'm homeschooled, so there's a certain gap in my knowledge. But I do wonder whether having that many people of the same age in one place for so much, like in school, whether that's trouble. Like I think, and the same thing at the extremes. Like I go to retirement home too, and I think there need to be some kids running around here.
Yeah,
And
certainly.
yeah, it seems like it's you get more information. Like it's not such a monoculture if you can have more of a mixture. And I
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
thinking
No, absolutely. That is in one of the cases where I think diversity is a good thing.
about. Hmm.
But yeah, you can definitely get some dangerous reverberation when you get that kind of too much of the same thing. So,
Okay, it would be easy to gloss over any lesbian epiphanies as, oh well, that's just gay stuff. Let's get on to the more exciting trendy trans stuff. But no. So you're 27, 25 to 27 is sort of when that's happening, right? um
27, yeah.
yeah. So what is there anything you can say about things that made you that what changed specifically as you go off birth control? What specific changes make you no longer think of yourself as straight?
So for me, I mean, I had, if I look back, I know this is something on your channel that you tried to keep people in their current mindsets to see what was going on at the time. Um, so for me, if I look back, when puberty started, some of the physiological symptoms, I call them symptoms like it's a disease, it's not. Certain feelings that you get when you know you're being sexually aroused, I started having those right from puberty and only towards women. But I didn't know that's what those feelings were at the time. So when I got to the point where I finally had my breakdown, I had had several years of having dreams of sexual activity with women. So that should have been my first clue, but it wasn't. And when I went off birth control, just at that point, I think just from being so sexually repressed, that I, at that point, was seeking some kind of sexual experience with a woman just to scratch the itch, I guess some guys might call it. That's really
Hmm.
how it felt to me. It was just, I just have this urge, this very strong primal sexual desire to have a relationship with a woman, that I went and found somebody else online who was also questioning their sexuality, and we talked a little bit, met up, did some things, and from that point, I was like, "Yep, all right, that answers the question. There is no turning back." I had a short period of time where I experimented with couples because I was like, maybe I'm not totally, maybe I'm bi, maybe I just kept trying to hang on to some, I don't know, semblance of normalcy, whatever the hell that is, and experimented with couples for a while, but I just wanted nothing to do with the guys in that situation. It was just awkward as hell. So I said, nope, some people would say, how do you experiment with that? How do you get yourself in bed with somebody? Well, alcohol. You get drunk and you, and you just do it, which is what I did. Not proud of it. I'm sure that that's a lot of sexual experimentation that happens in college that I just didn't get, didn't do. But I did it, when I was 27, those few experimental situations, and I realized that nope, I don't want anything to do with the guys. It's just the women. That's the women. So from there, that's where it went.
Hmm. There are a couple of things I'm not sure if it's worth mentioning or not. You mentioned being not knowing what to make of early experiences of arousal, and I'm wondering if I'd heard another woman say the same thing, and contrast it directly with male experience that it actually was more confusing. She thought for women because it was less obvious.
Yeah.
Is that's you think that's like I'm testing the theory live right now.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, to try to be tactful, you guys have a very obvious physical marker of arousal.
This was what she said.
And girls really don't have that. But there is a particular sensation for me anyway, and maybe this is the same for other women. But for me, it's the sensation of when your arm's falling asleep and or any part of you is falling asleep and it's waking up again. That sort of
Numb and
this is
tingling.
all that I have. Tingling, yeah, sure, that's it. And it happens in your genitals, just like I imagine it does for everybody, or for a lot of people. So that I didn't understand that. And also what I've now come to realize is like a dopamine or maybe serotonin. I don't know, probably dopamine. There's a dopamine release, and you just it there are certain it makes you feel good for me anyway. And if you can be very self-conscious and self-aware to know when that's happening, which I've learned to become a little more in tune with my body to notice those kinds of things. There's also that, which I don't know if other women experience that too. But for me, that's how it works. It's the physical sensation and then the dopamine release.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'm definitely people comment. I want to do let's do science right here, or I could just do a Google search and maybe someone already figured it out. But anyway, okay, so yeah, so anything else to say about? It sounds like the lesbian thing. It was pretty much you tested it in the field and that gave you your answers. It
And
wasn't
that's
necessarily.
yeah, typically been how the kind of person that I am is that being Briggs Myers INTJ, it's hard to be in touch with my feelings, and I more just go, well, let's try this. This is a situation. Let's, maybe for most people, getting involved with, a husband and wife couple or a boyfriend girlfriend couple getting into a sexual situation, they would go, holy shit, I would never. That's super awkward. I could never put myself in that situation. Me, from a very cold, logical, scientific perspective, would go, okay, put yourself in bed with a guy and a girl. Which one do you want to spend more time with? And that's
I admire the practicality of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure. And those
Um,
people they know that it's all sexual experimentation. So in general, they're not very hurt by somebody doing something like that. They're obviously experimenting a lot with their own sexual interests. So it tends not to be so emotionally reckless, I suppose,
mhm.
because they're often a lot about just sexual experimentation. So, do your due diligence and make sure everybody's clean, sexuality wise. Ask for papers if you can. I know it's awkward, but that is something that people do. So, do that and then have at it, I guess. That's your experiment.
Okay. So what about that? That takes care of kind of the sex side of it. What about the psychological gender side of it? Was there anything at that time that you were noticing things that you retroactively, well, not retroactively, but you look retrospectively, you look back and think, oh, that makes more sense that way, or
Um, Well, the only thing that I can think of from a gender perspective is that for me, I am drawn to healthy femininity. And by healthy femininity, it's very, so as a masculine person, that makes sense to me that I'm drawn to, you know, my counterpart. So as a masculine person, I would be drawn to a feminine person. And that's not to say that people who are involved in masculine or feminine relationships are somehow wrong. It's just from a more, I guess, biologically equivalent standpoint, you would think masculine and feminine, they're complements to one another. So when I really fully embraced my masculine aspects, it made sense to me that I would be attracted to, more feminine women or women in general, because let's be honest, women who are very tomboy or athletic in nature, or what you might call butch lesbians or butch dykes, they do absolutely nothing for me. They might be woman, female, but I'm not attracted to them at all. So from a gender perspective, it's, biologically has to be female and also relatively feminine for me.
Now,
That made sense.
this may be a complete mistake on my part, but one thing that comes to mind when you say that is that I'm not sure someone who was biologically male would be so discerning.
Maybe not.
It
Yeah.
just crossed my mind. I mean, I don't know if that gets us anywhere, but it was just an interesting observation. Was so were there any things that you were not personality wise, socializing, anything that you weren't doing that you then felt that you didn't feel comfortable doing and then that you started to do, or vice versa?
So from then to now, um,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
I
just again off the top of my head, like for example, you've got tattoos. Let me get my arm right. Was that after that? I'm going to guess.
yeah, absolutely.
So not that that's. I think one could debate it, but I think it probably is more common in men than women for whatever reason at this point. It's probably
Certain
changing.
styles, yeah, certain styles of tattoo, absolutely. And I've seen some tattoos on women that accentuate their female anatomy, their curves or something like that, and they're very, very tastefully done,
Hmm.
uh, art wise, and I think they're gorgeous.
Hmm.
But yeah, in general, where you choose to get your tattoos and what you choose to get your tattoos of absolutely could be much more masculine. And yeah, I didn't start to get those tattoos until I came out right around 27. So yeah, I was highly discouraged as a female, as a woman, to get those kinds of tattoos. And so I didn't for a very long time. And it makes sense to me. My father would say, you're not going to be able to attract a guy, or any decent kind of guy with looking like that, because guys don't really want their women to look like that. And no shit, now that makes sense to me. I wouldn't want somebody that I'm involved with, feminine wise, to have tattoos all quite like that. I mean, of course, there's exceptions to that rule. Plenty of guys, tattoo artists who like fully tattooed women and they don't care. That's their thing. Cool, fine. Just a general trend, you know. So he was just concerned that I was going to be constraining my partner pool
Right,
entirely too much, but he was looking at the wrong partner pool. So,
right. So
but
that was an attempt at an example, though. I mean, I'm just thinking
yeah,
of the things that you, like in a cartoony way, like you say, "Oh, I'm lesbian. I guess now I can do this." Like, was
yeah,
there any?
right. Yeah, no, let's see. I probably would have cut my hair much shorter if if for a couple of reasons. There are some things like eventually when I'm able to grow a little more visible facial hair, it's coming in, but it's blonde or red, so it's not going to be very visible for a good while. But I would like to go more of the Viking Norwegian hairstyles where there is some kind of braid perhaps, and I do very much like the half up, half down thing. But my wife also very much prefers the somewhat longer hair, so you do some compromise some things so to keep my hair like this. Um, it's a compromise, but I might have cut my hair much shorter had it not been for those few things after I came out. But otherwise, I was already dressing, acting, doing a lot of the things that I wanted to do. There wasn't a ton that really changed, except with my intimate relationships, and a little bit with, having my breasts removed. That was another thing that, as a huge step, I didn't have done until just about a year ago, actually. Um, that I probably would have much hesitated in doing if there wasn't such knowledge and acceptance of transgender type surgeries. So,
Okay, well then let's finish the biography. So, starting from around the age of 27, um, what happens of relevance that so that you change from thinking that, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but going from lesbian to trans. What was
yeah,
that actually
lesbian
like?
trans. So, it was, I guess lesbian was kind of a stepping stone, but for me, I, I hadn't learned, and this is something that's interesting, something to note, that, like you said, some trans people know from a very early age that they feel like they're in the wrong body. For me, I didn't have that sense of inner knowing. I had to encounter the phenomenon out, in the social sphere before I could latch onto it and say, okay, yeah, that describes me. So I sort of, when I talk to people about it, I describe it as fumbling around in the dark until, I come upon something that I can, more tangibly learn and see and actually wrap my brain around.
Hmm.
So I just, after lesbian, I started, okay, so I could be a butch lesbian, and that's okay. That's a thing to be, right? And the, the longer I was off of birth control, the more I learned about medical procedures and other things available to me, like transgender. Okay, that's a thing, and people get their breasts removed. They go on hormones. They do all these things. These are options available to me. I spent probably a solid year doing research on it and just settling on it for a while to see, okay, is this something that I want to do? And after I had gone through lots of therapy to undo a lot of my childhood biases, things that I grew up thinking from parental influences, once I cleared all that away, and then there was nothing left that would indicate that the reason I would want to transition might have been related to, again, childhood trauma, like you were saying, that all of that had been, cleared away. Okay, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. No, it's just that I really hate my breasts. I just don't like them at all. It doesn't suit my sense of self or just being comfortable in my own skin. So it was that year of therapy and research that just led into, okay, nope, I really think I'm very much going to like these changes, and let's just go for it. And it just continues to get better as time goes on.
So, can you get more graphic about what it means to hate your breasts?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how, but would you say you then identify this as a feeling that you'd had forever, or did it develop
Um,
more? Was it more in relationships, more when someone's manipulating them, so to speak?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'd always hated them to be manipulated anyway. I know for some people, that's in a form of eroticism for them, but
I think it's more than
on,
some.
yeah, right. Yeah, okay, fair enough. For me, it was just more like, I just, I'm not paying attention to them. They're just there. But anytime I would pay any attention to them, it was just ugh, that's and I give you facial features and things because it's just a feeling. Again, I know, and that's weak. I know a lot of transgender people, sometimes that's the only thing they have is just, oh, it's just a feeling, and that's really weak sometimes to use as an argument. But it really did come down to that. If I can think of a way to describe, okay, so if we want to put me back in my high school years, I remember a very particular incident, and this sucks because our family has genetic history for particularly voluptuous breasts. And so me and all my sisters, when we were younger, I weighed probably a solid 20, 25 pounds more than I do now in high school. And I had double D breasts. And the first dance that I went to in high school, dressing like all the other girls, because that's just what you did, I didn't question it. When I had some of the other guys, get really bashful and attentive towards that, and wow, like, because I would cover it up, I would always dress very tomboy. So when I show up at the dance in makeup and hair and breasts hanging out, like all the other girls, it's like all of a sudden I'm getting attention, and I'm going, I don't want that attention. But I didn't think about the consequence. I didn't think, yeah, you're gonna dress that way, you're gonna get that kind of attention. Didn't think about it at all. So that stands out in my mind. One particular guy from high school who made mention of that, I was like, yeah, you're right, I do. God, I feel awkward now. And I continued doing that,
But
dressing feminine. Go ahead, sure.
that doesn't sound entirely uncommon, right? I mean, it sounds
I
like it
guess
could be
not.
a pretty awkward. Like they didn't ask for these things.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I mean, I haven't taken a poll, but I can imagine that these things suddenly showing up. Like at least, like this is one case where again where I'm very happy to have not gone through the conventional schooling experience. But
Yeah,
would think that for girls, they have to deal with the sexual changes more, like they can't hide them as readily in
sure,
cases like that. And
sure.
so I would imagine it can be
And
quite
you
awkward.
might be very, very right about that. That puberty can just be awkward all around, whether you're trans or not. And I have heard people say that, certainly. For me, and my wife is kind of a control for me to bounce these ideas off of, no pun intended. But she loves to have her breasts, and she doesn't like to show them off like extra cleavage, but as an accessory to femininity, she calls them. She loves them, and I particularly love them on her too. So, and she likes having that kind of attention from me. And for me, even as I got older, I just didn't want them. I didn't want any attention to be drawn to them whatsoever. And as the longer now that I've been on testosterone, the longer I've gone, when I had them, the more they just felt like tumors, literally. And that's the first thing that comes to mind to me is just like these are fatty growths that I just can't stand. And if I can't imagine the vast majority of women feel that way about their breasts, so disgusted that they're fatty growths. They might not like them. They might, think, oh, I don't want to have to wear a bra. I don't want to do these things. But there's not this intense disgust towards them, which on me I had, which I think probably is the best qualifier for gender dysphoria that you can have if you feel intense disgust for something.
It's what I expect, whether it's correct or not. No, so it sounds like it was a growing disgust. It sounds like initially you were kind of just you had what you had and that was it, and then there's the social side of it, which is other people noticing, which isn't the same thing as the more visceral what you're describing. Um,
Right.
so is there a particular point? I'm hoping this will not be either boring to you or to people listening, but I'm inclined to go through this fairly methodically.
Sure.
Is there any? Was there a particular point, or what do you think getting into relationships was more what made them more of a
I
problem?
think, honestly, what I think made them even more of a problem was testosterone. And that's interesting to me is that maybe if I hadn't been on testosterone, I might have been able to tolerate them if I needed to for the rest of my life. I probably would have wore binders, tight sports bras, probably would have gone the route that a lot of other people who don't go the route of surgery take, which is just doing lots of pectoral exercises to reduce their size down to, nothing. But even with all of that, for me, breasts are such a feminine marker, and I see myself as such a thoroughly masculine person that it definitely would have been something that I would have tried to hide. Um,
So
and
is it a double? Is it a double whammy then? You went off birth control and you went on testosterone.
yep, I went from here to here, way from one side to the other.
Um, what a quick note about amounts. Do you have any idea how much estrogen is in birth control relative to what you would already have? Like I've heard testosterone as being 10 times I think.
Yeah, I don't know, but what I do know is that birth control, I think, is less estrogen and more progesterone, or it's measures of each during different parts of the pill pack to mimic a menstrual cycle. So I do not know what the actual dosage comparisons are between the two. Um, so yeah, that would be something interesting to know.
I'm trying to remember whether I heard somewhere that there in discussing it was a book specifically talking about the effects of different hormones on psychology. And this is a relatively old book. Um, it might have been progesterone that corresponded to what was called female receptivity towards sex. Does this ring any bells or make any kind of sense? This could be.
Um, yes, it does actually. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know there was something about how it was at different stages in a woman's cycle. Felt like different things and didn't like, and it
Yeah,
didn't have similar.
that is absolutely, that's very true. Yeah. And I live that experiment every 28 days with my wife now, but because it's true, they, at different points in their cycle, they do or don't want certain things, perhaps sexually or even just their choice in mate. They've done experiments on this where women, while they're ovulating, prefer men with much more angular jaws that have more masculine features, and when they're not ovulating, they prefer men with slightly more feminine features, which is very interesting. So, yeah, that is hormonal.
Right. Okay, so then it sounds like now's the time to talk about testosterone, if especially if it was because someone could argue, well, then maybe you should have stayed off testosterone and then you wouldn't have needed to do surgery and would that be better? And leaving aside what people may think of that argument, so what led you to testosterone?
Yeah. So for that, I it's a fantastic question. Um, there's a video that I did called "The Unexpected Effects of Testosterone," which I've seen a few other trans YouTubers talk about, which is that when they went on testosterone, everything seemed to just kind of shift to more mental health alignment, I guess you could say, where they just felt more centered. And I know in that video that Jordan Peterson did with Abigail Schreier, where they talk about how testosterone, does alleviate effects of depression and anxiety for a period of time in women, so that there might be that misleading, hey, women think that they're doing better on testosterone because they actually have depression or anxiety, and testosterone helps that for a short period of time. So for me, I was curious. I didn't ever have any symptoms of depression or anxiety, but because I was such a masculine person, I thought, okay, maybe I will experience this, centering of self if I go on this testosterone. Because I had searched out these videos ad nauseum as much as I could find. And at worst, if it doesn't work, let's just say 6 months in, and my voice starts to drop, or there are some other changes that happen that are irreversible. Am I okay with those symptoms? Well, yeah, I'm actually more than okay. I want some of those symptoms and changes. I wanted a deeper voice. I wanted facial hair. And the receding hairline is something that just comes with the territory, whatever, but that usually doesn't happen until a few years in, which is what's happening for me. And even that being the case, am I okay with that? Yeah, I'm okay with that. So for me, it was let's see if this can improve my life anymore, and it did, and has continued to improve. So it was I'm not sure. Let's try it. All things considered.
Okay, so you were looking for the the voice change and the centering, as you call it. It sounds like those are the main things you were looking for.
Yeah, just the sense of centering, that sense of general well-being, like things are finally aligned. And I looked at it from a very medical perspective, which is that if men in their later years need more testosterone so that they feel healthier and they have a better sense of vitality, that maybe, even though I'm a biological female, maybe I have some internal physiological things that would actually respond better to testosterone than they do to estrogen and progesterone. And that was kind of an experiment that I ran on myself, really. Like, can you be a biological female and have physiological things in your inner workings deep within yourself that respond to testosterone better? And likewise, it can work both ways. Maybe for a male who's trans woman or trans female, that maybe him being on estrogen or progesterone, he would feel better. I don't know the literature on that as much, but for me anyway, like I said, it was primarily to see if I could just improve my mental health in a better
And
sense.
and what at this point you've already are living as a lesbian and that's working. What's missing? What's wrong with that?
What's missing? Yeah. Um, Pushing the envelope for me, scientific inquiry especially, is something that I'm constantly in pursuit of. So in some ways, I suppose I used myself as an experiment to see if, okay, if it's pretty decent here, can it get better? And I did think that there was room for that with, again, not really liking my breasts, thinking, okay, yeah, I could accept myself as a female with all that biology, but if I could have it better, why not? And so that's, yeah, I guess the looking at all the things that being on hormone therapy could offer me, plus, what if I were able to pick and choose something to even further um, express myself, my sense of self, then all right, sure, yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna need more help with that. Is it just
Yeah, that's
moment?
fine.
Is it like momentum? Like you've already had, this could be totally wrong, but you're like, getting out of all this. I'm imagine it would at least retrospectively seem really depressing, like the
Yeah,
12-year relationship and so on for multiple reasons. So
sure, yeah.
is it just sort of, oh, I'm finally figuring out what's been wrong? How good can it be, or how wrong could it still be, and I don't know.
And I don't
Uh,
know. Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
because I mean, it's still a pretty radical thing to do, right? And it's at this point or that point in the, if I understand where you'd be in your life, you'd be more out and about. I'm assuming you weren't living at home at that point.
correct.
Um,
Yeah, that was a
and
big part of it. I had to get out of the house, away from my family, like
right,
total separation kind of thing, to experiment with that. So
so I mean, it seems like it would have been a good place to stop and think things were pretty good, even if you were still not completely satisfied with your breasts, at least. Like, what would even give
sure.
you the idea to try something else? Was it hearing about testosterone and trans related stuff, or
Yeah, so when you there was, okay, so maybe here was the moment, I think that was the tipping point for me. There's a YouTuber, his name is Alan. The channel is the Slow Fox, SLOFOX, the Slow Fox,
Mhm.
and he doesn't do too many updates anymore. But I watched all of his videos, and he went from coming out as lesbian, somewhat little bit later in life, to okay, I'm a butch lesbian, to okay, actually maybe I'm trans, and it followed this progression. He referred to it as a peeling of layers, like an onion. You keep going and going and going, and for me that's how it unraveled for me. It wasn't the typical transgender experience of knowing at a young age and having gender dysphoria so severely. It was, and again, I attribute this to my lack of self awareness, where it's just been this slow journey of discovery, where the more I learn, the further I go, the more I oh, okay, well, we can just keep taking this further, and it just keeps, the rabbit hole just keeps going. And that's when I watched his videos, because he followed the exact progression that I followed. I thought, okay, so this worked for him, and I can relate to damn near just about everything he has to say. So maybe this is also me. And so far, that's been the case.
so how would you describe, if you can, the emotion or emotions that would lead you to pursue testosterone? Again, this is just me again trying to understand at that point when you've already solved so much, what it is that's
Yeah, I think it was emotions. So you're asking about emotions specifically, and that, as an INTJ, that is a weak spot for me, because I am methodically logical and very
okay. I got
void
new. I got
of
new
those
one.
often.
Can you recall, or even make up? It still might be valid. Any
Yeah.
images or anything you imagined when you imagined it changing you? Like, was this?
Yeah.
Oh, I can sing country in a male voice. I don't know. Like,
No, it was the physical form that more. Okay, so here's something
there is
interesting.
fat redistribution, which we didn't mention.
Yes, absolutely. Which for me, it's changed a little bit, but I've always been. My dad is a tall, thin guy, and I take after him in just about every way possible, despite being female. And so, fat redistribution for me hasn't been, it hasn't changed a whole lot, but it does happen. But for me, it was more. I realized, and this is something else that I had to sit down and think about. Imagine, this is crazy. when I tell people this, it's hard for some people to imagine this because they're much more in tune with themselves and their emotions than I ever have been. And I actually had to sit down with myself when it came to parsing out my sexuality versus what I wanted to be as my expression of self. I had to sit down and say, okay, when I look at a woman, am I sexually aroused? Do I want to be her? Is it a combination of the two, or is it one or the other? Okay. When I'm looking and I'm admiring the female figure, and I had to go, okay, nope, I am sexually interested in that, but I don't want to be that. Okay. Now I'm going to look at figure of let's just say a nicely chiseled guy. Do I want a sexual relationship with that? Am I aroused by that, or do I want to be that? And for me, when I thought about that, that's when it kind of clicked, where I was like, okay, the female figure is what I'm sexually drawn to, and the male figure, I'm drawn to it because I want to be that. And so for me, being on testosterone, I knew that I'd be able to build more muscle. And while I haven't worked out too much, I definitely have gotten more muscle as a result. That, I've developed in those ways. And that gives me a greater sense of self-confidence too, without having to spend so much time at the gym as women would have to in order to overcome some of their hormones, or to supplement in some ways, which I just wasn't interested in. So for me, that was that. I guess that was the physical. Okay, testosterone can in some ways do that for me, and that's how I'm going to feel more like myself. And then the breast removal was, again, something that was secondary to that, which was, you don't look terribly masculine or male when you have
Yeah.
breasts. So.
Yeah, it spoils like the muscle poses to some
A
degree
little bit,
if from
just a
that
little
point of
bit.
view. Yeah.
It's mildly distracting, we'll put it that way.
Okay. I'm gonna try one more time to see if I can get this, and then I'll move on. So what I've got is that it was an interesting experiment. There was some combination, perhaps, of it seeming like things could get better. Now, is that like you don't know how much, and there may be yet something you can do that will make things better still, but I'm thinking there must have been something negative you were reacting against as well to try something like that. So partly it's the idea of having a more male body. Um, is there is there something it wouldn't, unless you thought that in redistributing your weight it would make your breast shrink, it wouldn't really solve that. In fact, as you say, it actually made your discomfort worse.
Right.
Um, so is there anything else that any problem you had in mind you thought it might fix? Was there some problems you still had that, even if you didn't clearly identify at the time, that would have caused a general feeling of this could be better? Or
Sure. I think
this is like I don't want, if I let this go, not only will I not understand as well, but if anyone else is watching and is confused, they'll just think, well, why'd you do that? That's so like I gotta.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the consideration here is that the time frame. So, I mean, I went from being completely in the closet to fully out trans in a very short period of time. So, I don't think I necessarily had the time to sit and say all of these things are a problem for me. I went with such speed in my research that before I had time to consider, okay, I don't like these things, these are a problem for me, let's fix them with said thing. Um, I was basically moving alongside the solution as I was uncovering the solution necessarily before I had developed the problem, if that makes sense.
Um,
Because I had done it in such a short period of time. Does that help at all?
I think I understand that you're saying that that almost in encountering possible solutions that other people had found, you could even then realize, oh yeah, that actually might fix something I have. I didn't even
I
realize it was a
had,
problem.
yeah,
Now, a person could object and say that recognizing those solutions was actually causing the problems, which
exactly.
does seem to be something that happens. I have heard that sort of account. Like that's the um, this may or may not be controversial to people listening, but the rapid onset gender dysphoria that shows up in teens and then dissipates, and that's the key part of the story, is it dissipates. Um, that often has to, as I understand it, has to do with social situation and things online that someone consumes and so on. But anyway, so that's not what, as
Yep.
far as you can tell, that's not what the case was here.
Exactly. Yeah, I wasn't being led by the nose with any of this, and I also, because I thought about that, I did have a moment when I listened to that podcast from Peterson with Schreier, that I thought, oh shit, have I done something terribly wrong here? But then I realized, never. First of all, I'm a fully grown adult, not in a social circle of a bunch of women having that reverberating conversation. And I've also gone through a bunch of therapy to clear up all the things that usually lead to people transitioning for all the wrong reasons. So I had already cleared all of that away preemptively. Again, I think I got really lucky with this, or maybe just everything happened the way that ideally you might want it to happen, where things kind of went in order so that it was nice and clean, and one thing led to the other. Um, so yeah, no, these problems have, I guess, always been there, but for my lack of awareness, my lack of introspect, and actually asking myself these questions until this point, I just paid no attention to them. I put my head down and I did whatever, out in the greater world, focused on those things. A workaholic, you could say I absolutely have been most of my life. Um, Also, a problem for INTJs, they don't spend any time introspectively. It's just, working out and nothing emotional. So those are all good, concerns to raise. But again, I didn't fit the bill on any of the typical pitfalls that people get into transitioning for, and it not being right for them. None of those fit.
Okay, so what changes did you notice with testosterone that you want to talk about? Um, and how do you what do you think about them as far as them being positive, negative?
Yeah. For me, just in general, being a very masculine energy person, I find that it's much more easy to navigate socially. And I'm not saying that I did this to navigate socially, because I didn't. Um, Being seen as a male is much more in alignment with what societally people expect. So for me to have a deeper voice and to speak the way that I do, behave the way that I do, and my body language, by the way, from a very young age, people always told me, you speak, you act and hold yourself very confidently. That's somewhat unusual for, women, or, young women or whatever. It was always very noteworthy for them to say that. And of course, then when I came out years later, they were like, that makes sense. But I very much, the deeper voice isn't just for the facade of the masculine or male social figure. I feel better. I haven't done this video yet, but I'm going to. I have a theory that vibrations, frequencies of voices, that's something that we are keying into, whether it's for ourselves or for what we're attracted to. So for me, I'm attracted to women with higher vibration or higher frequency voices. And for myself, when I heard myself speak before I went through the transition, I hated the sound of my voice. And now, even just feeling the deeper vibration in my chest, it's soothing for me. It's actually like a form of self-soothing that I finally feel like I'm speaking from a place that's actually me. It sounds maybe kind of strange, but on a scientific level, the only thing I can relate to that would be potentially that we have wavelengths or frequencies of our voices that we're maybe feel better with for ourselves, or what we might be attracted to in other people. So when I got the deeper voice, I found myself humming to myself, which I'd never ever done. But I would just that low deep in your chest, which ancient peoples, I guess, used to do when they were channeling, meditating, things like that. I found myself doing now that my voice has changed, but never before did I do that.
Um, I don't know if I need to clarify this, but with the sound such as it is, initially I did not hear humming with an H. I heard coming with a C, and when you see
Whoops.
and it really had very different meaning.
Whoops. Yeah, no, humming, like
Humming, yes,
hummingbird.
yes,
Yeah.
okay. Um,
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so
Okay. So
that deeper voice, and actually, so hair. Some people, some I've heard some trans people say, it's growing in places that I don't want it to grow. And, certainly that's, I guess, not exactly pleasant, maybe even for some guys. But I have found that the more body hair in general that I get, the more comfortable I feel. Also, very strange. I didn't expect that at all. I thought, okay, if I don't like it, I'll shave it, I'll wax it, whatever, big deal. It's fine. But just the more hair that I've gotten, the more comfortable I feel. So that's interesting, very interesting to note. Some of the other changes, the fat redistribution, take it or leave it. Muscle, that's something that, again, if superficially feel a little more empowered, even though I'm a very small, slight, I guess you could call petite individual. I mean, I'm 120 pounds soaking wet, 5'5", so I'm small. It can be kind of hard to convince other people of my masculinity, but that a little bit more muscle will always help, certainly. So those are some of the things for testosterone that have helped me. And then, of course, the whole just feeling mentally better in a place that I didn't even know I could be. Before I thought I was pretty damn confident, and I projected that, pretty centered, but there is that extra piece that I just can't quite put my finger on it. But it's just a general sense of centering. Well,
are there any? I'm trying to understand that centering better. I'm wondering if there's any situations or anything that you could use as an example or an analogy or anything.
yeah, no, there's no one thing that I can think of. It's just I just it's one of those things where I just remember it just kind of hit me out of the blue, where I was walking around my house doing one thing or the other, and I just was like, man, I just feel right. I feel good. And I don't know. That's literally all I can ascribe it to. And so I know hormones definitely can dictate your emotions, because your emotions, as they say, are energy in motion. And a lot of that is, within your body. So it's your emotions can very much be caused by physiological ongoings within you, things you can't see. And so for me, that makes sense that a hormone, like dopamine or serotonin, if they can give you that, man, I just feel good. Why can't testosterone do that if it's something that your body actually needs? So,
Hmm. Um, could you tell you made a video about the first time you passed, which is the term used to mean were identified as you would like to be identified or as you feel is appropriate. And that was interesting to me.
yeah,
Could you retell that?
right. Yeah, so it was just walked into an appliance store, and I didn't think I looked particularly masculine that day. I was fairly early on in my testosterone days. So I walked in to the lady behind the counter, and we were just talking, and I needed help with something. So she gestured to somebody else in the store and said, "Hey, can you help him with this particular thing?" And at that moment, I was like on high alert all of a sudden, because you recognize it very distinctly as a trans person, especially if you're being called a different pronoun all of a sudden. And so I just remember all at once being like, "Oh, it's working," and then terrified, because I'd never really embodied that. So I remember panicking, thinking, what do guys really do in these situations? What am I supposed to say? What's normal? What do guys do in this situation? And it was funny to me how self-conscious all of a sudden I became, because that was also something that I hadn't been used to in my life. I had just moved through with this, level of confidence that, you know, I didn't think about that ever. I didn't worry about how I was seen by other people. I was just me. And then all of a sudden, somebody sees me as something that I'm technically not, and yet it's something that I want. So there's this really weird sandwiching of, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad emotions, just, going all at once. And also just curious to me that I would all of a sudden be so concerned about what is be subjective, and think of what's appropriate for guys to do or say or whatever in a situation. It was all of it happening at once. So um, obviously not terribly comfortable when it happened in that moment, but later it was just fascinating for me to dissect all of those pieces. What
Well,
I was thinking, why I was thinking it.
and to have spent, to so much of your life, as you describe it, as being unusually masculine, in your opinion, um, and then, uh, in that moment, for it to completely go out the window, in a sense.
Yep.
um,
Yep.
okay, so that leads me to a few things. I'm trying to remember the choice of words you used. There are a few things about the way you did that video, including your use of Disney movies, that I think was Disney movies clips, that I thought was interesting.
Probably, yeah.
So this is the first time I'm actually looking at my paper, pretty much, for uh, a question, but I have it somewhere. Do you feel fake? I mean, you described yourself almost as feeling fake at that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was this, yeah, there, because I knew that I was biologically female, that when somebody calls you by, a pronoun, they're automatically assuming that you are biologically whatever that is. They're not, parsing it into, is this person, gender wise, they're not calling you a pronoun based on your gender, your energy, are you masculine or feminine? So when I say gender, I mean masculine or feminine. I'm not referring to biological sense. That's how I parse the two. So, um, in that moment, I felt fake because I know that that person is assuming that I have, biological parts. But then when I stepped even further back, I thought, why does that even fucking matter at all? Because it, in the context of things, it really doesn't. They're not going to treat you based on, I guess, your whether or not your genitals are going to enter that interaction in any way, shape, or
One
form.
hopes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, right. So it was interesting to me, that I would feel fake because I was going based on that biological assumption, but really it doesn't actually matter, um, at all. It's when you get to know somebody intimately, I guess, is where it would matter. If you're in an intimate relationship, then yeah, you need to have that conversation immediately so that you're not being fake. But it was interesting to me that I still felt fake, going off of that parameter. So,
What I'm interested in, I like the story, partly not only because it's funny, but because, in terms of appreciating what life is like, for certain people at a certain time. But also, I'm sure, I think I've read it in comments, and I don't know how sizable a percentage of the population would say this. They would see you as being fake, and I'm wondering what if you think that's a valid point. What you have to say about that? I mean, you said a little bit already.
yeah, um, yeah. So my first inclination would be to investigate why that person thinks and feels that way, why they think or feel that I'm being fake, and then if what they would have me do instead. So, okay, if they
That's a
think I'm
great
being
question. In my opinion, that's the right
right,
response.
exactly. So, okay, so if I'm being fake and if somebody calls me by the incorrect pronoun, am I to then say no? I'm a female, and now let's say I've gone through my transition process even further. I've got a full, facial hair, goatee going on. I have no breasts. All my clothes are very masculine. What's that going to do to that other person then? All of a sudden, if I say, no, actually, I'm a she, now you've completely derailed that interaction. And I can counter to guess that in 9.9 interactions that you have in a day, that's the last thing that anybody wants to sit down and try to have a discussion about. Imagine you're at a fast food window, all right, ma'am, have a good day, or all right, sir, have a good day. Actually, it's, like, you think about the flip side of that, it makes absolutely no sense to try to correct that. So, I mean, okay, yeah, it's fake, but how many times in a day do you lie? Otherwise, just for the sake of, social context, just to get by in a day. to me, that seems like one of those things where it's not worth correcting anybody or you know, otherwise. I'm not trying to deceive somebody into thinking that I have something in my pants that I don't. It's literally just a matter of social ongoings. You know, just the flow, social flow of the day. That's what I'm trying to get at. So,
Right. Yeah.
I would turn that question on that person and ask them about the whole fake and why they feel that way and what I should do instead. And then, oftentimes, when that conversation comes out, most people go, "Oh, okay, yeah, they don't think that all the way
Yeah.
through." You
Yeah.
know?
Well,
So,
exactly, and that's part of what I hope to do is to think things through with people,
right.
and that's what I'm hoping you're helping with, and I believe you are. I will bring this up because I said I'd get to it. You wanted to talk about so-called dead naming, where you use
Yeah. Yeah.
which is the name for the name that a trans person had before they changed the name to something else.
Right. Yep. I know that there are some people outspoken in the trans community who say, don't ever, use the dead name. Don't question it. Don't ask about it. It's a, horribly, um, you know, visceral, raw, seeping wound for trans people. No, at least for me, it's not. But I'm like you, also very cerebral. I want these kinds of things to be out in the open and people to question them. If they're curious, ask. Um, so that's one thing that I wanted to say to get that out of the way, that for me anyway, the dead naming is not, and if somebody's using it on purpose, all right, you're probably being an ass, whatever. I don't have to pay any attention to you. I don't have to interact with you anymore. But I don't want it to be this taboo thing because, and this is something I feel a little bit maybe differently than a lot of the population does about names in general, is that a name is something that you're given before your parents even know you as a person. They pick it based on what they think and feel they want. They don't know you at all. And so for me, when I renamed myself, I thought, it's kind of unusual to me that people don't change their name more often, especially if they don't like the name they were born with, the name that their parents gave them. It doesn't embody them in any way. And for me, it's now become a little weird that people don't question that more often. And it's relatively easy to change your name, at least in the state of Florida, it is anyway. So for nominal fee, why not? If it's something that you can personalize so many aspects about yourself, including your name, to where you identify with it more. And for starters, I chose my name because it's a fantastic conversational piece,
Mm-hmm.
especially if right now, if I'm getting, ma'am, sir, periodically back and forth from people, the name gives them, unless they have some kind of historical knowledge, the name gives them no context. It's a fairly gender neutral name, which is part of the reason why, one reason of many why I love it so much, is because maybe this is a little sadistic on my end, but it forces people to engage in conversation with me a little more. And I want to see the way that they respond to that. And I want to open dialogue in that way. It puts them in a spot where they can't go, oh, Jason, okay, guy, got it. Yep, cool. Or, oh, Melissa, yep, girl, got it. So it's working much to my benefit, I think, so long as I don't feel awkward about the ma'am, sir, which at first it's gotten much easier over time.
Easier to deal with, or it's become less of an issue because people just land on the side of male.
Easier to deal with, but I am getting more male more often, but I do occasionally get the man. So yeah, that's mostly what I wanted to say about all that. I did have an incredibly feminine name before this, and to be completely honest, I've always disliked it. It was always just not me. So I went by all kinds of other nicknames to try to soften that a little bit. It didn't really work fairly well because most shortenings are still very feminine. But yeah, so I was much, much happier to change my name, certainly.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I was going to say something and I forgot again. Every time, every episode, there's always a point where I just stare at the table and I can't remember what I was going to say. But,
Yeah,
anyways, let me see if I got any good questions here. I've got 2 pages.
cool.
No, I'm keeping an eye on the time. We're just coming up on an hour and a half. So
Really, that long already?
yeah,
It's
it
flying.
goes. I still have this idea of doing like a 4 hour one
A
with
marathon.
people, but I'm disappointed to find I get tired out readily. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I think I actually will have to come up with a more like a fitness routine that puts me in better shape to do this.
It's cerebral work is no joke. I mean, people kind of poo-poo it, like driving. Even even though you're on your butt, it's fairly taxing because you do have to monitor several things, or you should be if you're driving safely. And I think
Hmm.
this especially is akin to that because you are exercising all kinds of you know awareness and questioning and trying to put pieces together. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's easier I find to talk than it is to listen in some ways, like to actually paying attention generally. It's weird because I'll watch long podcasts, but I don't have to understand everything that's going on. I can let things slip and it isn't a problem. In the conversation, if you say something and I have no idea what it was, it might come back to get me. Um, okay, you've mentioned a brain. You talked as if, both here and on your channel, as if you subscribe to the theory of a brain body mismatch. Is that correct, or is it just, it seems reasonable so far?
Um, yeah. So, and by mismatch, I think we can just say that that doesn't always have to result in being transgender. Of course, there are plenty of super masculine women or super feminine guys that don't feel the need to alter their body, physically or take hormones in any way. But um, I do think that in order to, I think, in order to be transgender, there has to be a mismatch in the sense that you are much more of one, let's say for me, masculine, mentally speaking, and biologically, I'm female. So I guess yeah, there is that. I think that's one of the hallmarks anyway, is a mismatch, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're transgender.
Well, and my understanding was it's not like they can just scan people and say, okay, you've got a male brain, a female brain.
You're
I've
right.
heard.
Yeah,
I don't even know how much of a consensus there is. I'm sure I've read people saying that it's been disproven, but that also was what
yeah,
they wanted to believe, I think. So I don't know. And that's the problem, is almost
right.
everybody seems to want to believe something. They're not just finding out what's true.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, there's no, to my knowledge, there is no such thing as a male brain or a female brain, as in there are no physical markers that are identifiable with a MRI, CAT scan, any of those things that you could say, oh, okay, this is a male brain or this is a female brain. It has more to do with the wiring within it, or the parts of your brain that are more active. Um, so in essence, I mean, you may be able, and I'm sure in the future we'll be able to alter that however we see fit, which will be interesting. But as for now, it's just what you're naturally born with, having certain pathways wired, or just certain parts of your brain that are more active naturally.
so it's not
Which
what you
is
have; it's how you use it.
yeah, which is from birth. They have made note that when putting men and women in MRIs or CAT scans, I'm not sure which it is, but they can show functional MRIs maybe, or they can show different during certain tasks which parts of the brains are being used that are typically more characteristic of men versus women. They do note that that is a thing. So my guess is based on what I how I process the world, how I view things, it's parts of my brain would probably very much line up with your typical male. So,
Do you have? Get the feeling that you have not compared notes with many, if any, other either transgender people or even. And of course, it's funny because you get the idea of, at least I get the idea when I hear reference to this community, that community, trans community, gay community. It's like they're all connecting or something, and to the hive mind. But no, um,
not at all.
is that something you'd be interested in doing? Because I do wonder how, if there could be some like sort of anecdotal science could be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I I guess it's been somewhat tough for me to um, sit down and have conversations with a lot of the trans people that I've come across, because they tend to embody, I guess, certain viewpoints or politics, or even just maturity levels or conversational styles that I don't find to be very productive. Um, so if there were people where we could have conversations, like this, devoid of, ego or uh, taking things too personally, where it could just literally be a compare notes scientific discussion, absolutely, that would be of great interest to me.
Do you have an idea whether that impression you have of the political psychological makeup of is that just people that are public, or do you
Yeah, so that's
think?
another thing. I put my channel out there because I didn't see too many other people like me in, as a transgender, uh, speaking that way. So if I could find more like that, and I know they're out there, I just think that comes down to, I think, more of a personality kind of thing, where if you are more likely to enjoy attention in the spotlight, you're more the extroverted personality type, you're going to tend to also be higher in some other personality traits that, like you said, might hold. I don't want to get too much into politics,
No, it's all
but
right.
might be.
I can read your mind anyway.
So
Whereas our viewers maybe can't, but
you're right. Maybe I do believe in the silent majority. We'll just put it that way. So
that's
it's
my
just a
hope.
matter of finding those people to have those conversations with. I know they're out there. It's just getting them to be a little more open. They tend to be more introverted. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, I wonder how much too it's that the media amplifies people who are noisy and speak in sound bites, as opposed to people who quietly talk for 2 hours and say, "Gee, we only just started."
Yeah,
Uh,
right. Yeah, no, you're right. That's fantastic, because Crowder,
Steven Crowder.
Louder with Crowder,
Yeah.
the show, he talked about that when he had an interview with John Stossel, who Crowder wanted his "Change My Mind" pieces. Awesome, fantastic, love those. I mean, granted, sometimes he's a bit of an ass when he does it, but he actually brought that idea to major networks, the major mainstream media, and they said, we can't sell this. This is boring. Nobody wants to watch an entire hour long, back and forth with somebody. This isn't going to sell. And maybe there was a time when that was true, where the media was sensational. They had to, sell big headlines to people, because that's what got people's attention. But I do think culturally we're shifting now to, especially with these podcasts, people are willing to listen for 45 minutes, an hour, longer to these talks. And I think there's this appetite for this kind of thing now, whereas it may not have been before. So I think what you're doing is something that's going to be more, you will see more of that now, that where before, like you said, mainstream media was just sound bites, sensational, large shock value kind of thing. And we're moving away from that now, which I think is fantastic. We need more of that.
Okay. I'm curious. How are you doing as far as time and tiredness?
I got all day.
Okay.
Sunday
Okay.
is my day to delve into my channel and other pursuits involving that. So,
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Um, I have some family things I'll need to get to pretty much around 2, I think, give or take. It's not a hard um, limit, but it is there. Okay.
you let me know.
Yeah. Okay. Some of these I've already done. Um, have you noticed differences between how people treat you when they see you as being male versus female?
But yeah, yep. There are TED Talks out there by other prominent transgender people. There's a transgender woman, I can't remember her name, but she did a TED Talk um, talking about that specifically. And yeah, if you don't believe in the just the bias that people have innately in how they treat the sexes, then if you walk a day in transgender shoes, you'll realize pretty quickly that that is a very real thing. And yeah, absolutely. And it's not been um, horrible a horrible experience. It's an eye-opening, humbling experience, certainly, to see how different sides of the coin um, look. But yeah, I've noticed subtle things like guys will hold open the door for women, they won't for men usually. I remember a time when my dad and I used to go hunting a lot together, and I remember walking into a outfitter store with my bow in hand, like this is mine. I'm coming back to the counter to have it serviced, and I stood back there for several minutes with the guy behind the counter. He saw me and paid no attention to me until I, stepped up finally and put the bow on the counter. I said, "Hey, I need help with this." And this was me as a woman. And "Oh, is that your bow?" "Yes, it is. I walked in the store with it. I need help with my, So it was unusual. Um, but now, I walk up and if I purchase ammunition or something like that, "Oh, hey, bro, is this what you need?" Whatever. Like, there's not. Are you sure you have the right thing? Do you need help with? Are you, none of that. It's just, and a lot of the vernacular is different too. Hey, bud, hey, guy, hey, bro, hey, whatever is usually what I get now. Versus before, men, nothing. There would be no speaking, no friendly, anything. It's very cut off as far as communication goes. Kind of sad, but
Why do you think that is?
I, I've listened to some podcasts regarding that, and I think it's just the natural tendency for, men to hold themselves back because a lot of, I guess, the way that they talk might be considered kind of harsh or I don't know. They may not think that women would be terribly interested in a lot of what they have to say. And, men talk with men and women talk with women. They're just like to like in that way. I mean, those are kind of weak theories, but I have heard people talk about it in podcasts. And I think it's just more of a natural, innate, biological kind of thing. I'm sure there's some primitive, hardwired mechanism for it, but
What came to my mind when you're talking about them not having anything to say casually to women is that it might be because, well, I cannot, it's not even in the language. "Hey, ma'am," just doesn't quite. Oh, you could do it, but it's kind of formal and informal at the same time. Like, there isn't one, and I think it has to, maybe would have to do with, this isn't saying what should be, I'm just saying what is, perhaps, that it's more likely that if their methods of communication are all sexual, like they're flirtatious or this, as opposed to with guys where there's something else.
right,
um I wouldn't expect, I'm just guessing here, a woman behind the counter to have a problem with either sex. I would think she'd have something to say to either.
right.
um I
Yeah,
wonder if male communication is more short and incidental. It might actually be suited
yeah.
more for that.
There was another podcast that I was listening to recently about, again, the biological evolutionary uh, behaviors that we have, and that men, again, a lot of times when they engage women, it's because there is an interest, a sexual interest, and I think women are kind of keen on that at this point. They know maybe that if a guy is engaging them in that way, that there's probably some ulterior motive, and so they might behave a little bit differently with that. So it might be kind of difficult, let's just say, for a guy to just casually talk to a woman without her maybe being suspicious that he's interested in some way. So yeah, the communication reasons for communication are very different. Women talk just to talk. That's how they operate. That's how they think. They think better as they're talking things out. Versus men who tend to be more, I'll think and then I'll speak kind of thing. Um, so if a man is engaging somebody in conversation, it's usually towards some goal. Usually, not always, but that's a general trend. So the sexes have evolved to understand that, I think, on a subconscious level.
How much do you think that I don't know how unusual the perspective you just laid out is, but it seems unusual to me in sex and gender talks that aren't explicitly perhaps conservative. Do you think it is unusual? Do you think you have that partly based on what you've learned from experience and what you've learned from other sources, or do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely tend to fall more on the conservative end of the spectrum of things, and I think a lot of people who are more on the opposite end, more liberal, would find that kind of strange. Yeah, that they don't really necessarily think in terms of those um, boxes kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of your perspective on that one. And like I said, it's not a hard and fast rule. These are just, when it comes to, I've fallen into more of the evolutionary biology as it pertains to our behavioral drivers as just a general guideline, like, okay, these are the, the underpinnings that are there. We can certainly choose to act differently, but if you want to talk about instinct, that's where a lot of these things come from, and we do with them what we will if we're working on it from a higher conscious sort of situation.
Right. Is, I don't remember exactly what you've said in other videos about how you feel. Okay, let me put it this way. You said that you're interested in how people perceive you, whether they see you as male or female. Now, do you have a preference though?
I mean, yeah, I would prefer to be seen as male or masculine. That feels more in line with just everything about me. I've learned not to be offended at anything that somebody might perceive otherwise, and instead to investigate that a little bit more, and turn the inquiry onto that person, and find out what are they perceiving about me that they feel is feminine, and just learn from that how people see.
How do you feel though, if incidentally someone indicates that?
There is a slight twinge. There's a little like, ugh, that hurts a little because I'm trying to emote such masculinity. So it's but aside from that moment, I realized that little twinge, that feel of oof, is really just me. Um, and so when I get beyond that, it's momentary anymore. Um, yeah,
So
try
you
not to
don't.
dwell on it.
So it sounds like you don't perceive it as being. In most cases, there's no reason to assume that the person is trying to be irritating. So you don't see it as being any sort of conflict. But I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, from a personal point of view, does it jar with your own perspective? Does it? I mean, it's not like I've gone through life always being perceived as male, especially when I was younger, say 12 or so. I was actually fairly regularly. Um,
Sure.
and I didn't mind that much. But yeah, I'm just wondering if it's something specific that you've dealt with and thought about. It's
Yeah, not particularly, to be honest, because um, I look at things from a 30,000 foot perspective often, which again so it's very hard for me to get down into the micro, really get in touch with my feelings of myself, because I'm just not there most of the time. I'm way up here. So I don't, at that moment, I'm keen on how they see me. And so I try then at that point just to be aware that at any point there's going to be a tipping where maybe they question themselves, because I'm still going through some changes, and the facial hair is more obvious. So, and it's more than just, let's just say, a woman of Mediterranean background who happens to have a little more facial hair than the average woman. Let's just say it's purposeful. I'm bringing attention to it. It's so I then at that point, when I hear somebody refer to me as she, and it's going to be a recurring relationship, I'll keep it in the back of my mind that at some point that conversation will probably have to happen, because inevitably they will vacillate between he, she, in future interactions. And they're trying to, I guess, what I call dog whistle, where they're trying to get me to bite and say, okay, I mean, you know, which is it that you like? And I don't usually give them anything. I just sweep it under the rug. And at some point, when it becomes so obvious that they're struggling, then I have the conversation, because I don't want my interaction with them to be dominated by the idea that I'm transgender. I want them to just interact with me as they would anybody else under the radar, because nowadays anyway, with transgenders being the radical activists, the radical left, I'm afraid of a backlash coming where they're pushing for so much, so aggressively, in such a twisted way, that at some point people are going to be afraid to interact with me when they find that I'm transgender, or they're going to dislike interacting with me because they associate me with that face, with the radical left side face. And I don't want that at all. So for me, it's not that I'm embarrassed to say that I'm transgender. I don't care. What I don't want is that to taint the interaction that I have with them, and they're, you know, feeling like they're stepping on eggshells. So when I hear a pronoun that's probably going to change, that's just a note for me to, you know, oh, okay, so I'm going to have to, you know, be gentle, I guess, with this situation anymore. I don't really see it as a transgression, or I don't get too upset about it. Because I understand why people have that trouble.
Do you? Okay, I'm interested in talking to people, especially who are able to take the more distant 35,000 feet or whatever view that you do. But do you think it's unreasonable to expect people to take that view? People who are dealing with gender dysphoria or some other sexual thing. Um, like, it's a great standard, but I don't know if I could live up to it, honestly.
No, I recognize that the way that I go about thinking about things and seeing things is really, really different from a lot of people. Um, and I don't think it's unreasonable to ask somebody to try to look at it from that 30,000 foot perspective. But I do, in learning what I've learned, I do think it takes a lot of discipline to get to that point. I personally feel, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. There are pros and cons to everything, however you want to look at it. I'm able to do this relatively naturally now because of how cerebral I am. But I certainly didn't start out that way. I had to do lots of therapy and coaching to remove my ego from things before I could, really truly take advantage of that ability to look at things from that 30,000 foot perspective. But I do think for a good chunk of people, it is very difficult, and maybe unreasonable to expect them to be able to do that easily or quickly, especially if they've not really been practicing. So, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I don't know what, I wish, for the way I look at things now, I wish that everyone who was trying to, um, who was advocating for anything really, but some sort of social progress, we'll say, um, was able to take the approach that you do. But I don't know that it's reasonable to ask for it, or at least maybe what's needed is if there actually was more communication and more of a community, then they could promote the people who are able to do that to speak for them. But as it is, I don't know what the solution is where, I can say that in almost anything, right? It's generally the more extreme people who I think tend, because it's extreme for us to even be on YouTube, I would say. Like, immediately, there's got to be something weird going on. Why am I even here? But it's even, so I don't know what the solution would be, other than some sort of election.
Yeah, and that's I guess one of the great questions of balance and existence here is, I wouldn't necessarily, no, absolutely, I wouldn't want everyone to be of that 30,000 foot perspective, because we need people who are more introspective and in touch with their feelings and emotions to be able to navigate that territory. We need both. to be able to come together. You know, right, left brain, left and right politics. You know, it's you need that balance. Not one side is better than the other, certainly. So it's very difficult, I think, to look at things from that 30,000 foot perspective, but also keep in mind the stuff that's down in the weeds. You know?
Yeah, and it's something that worries me because I can find guests who I think, yes, I can imagine talking to that person. I have a sense of how the conversation will go. I can ask the questions I want to. We'll know it, understand each other. Um, but I can't guarantee that with the people watching. You know, if I actually became at this point, it may be irrelevant. But if I had, thousands of people watching, um, the best I think I can do is make sure that we understand each other so that they can see that we don't mean each other harm.
Right.
But I don't know. Um, so, for example, here's my next question, and I don't know whether it's a good thing to ask publicly. It's perfectly reasonable to ask privately, or do you want to know how I see you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Right, but I don't know. Like, if I didn't see you exactly, if what I say doesn't match the most extreme views, am I walking into trouble? Not with you, but by being on YouTube. Am I going to upset people I don't want to upset? Never mind, I don't have political opponents. I prefer not to upset anyone. So,
And
but
I think just saying that you don't want to upset anybody is certainly not your goal to. And neither is it your responsibility to police other people's emotions. That's something that the radical left really likes to do, is try to police other people's emotions, which is none of their business as far as I'm concerned. But you are not going to be able to please all of the people all of the time.
mhm.
So I think if you state what it is, you know, your intentions, that this is, you don't intend to, you know, harm anybody. This is in pursuit of, you know, the best possible outcome. Certainly, of course, the path to hell was paved with good intentions, but I think this here is still relatively benign as far as that goes. Of course, you're going to have people that are going to tune off as soon as, let's just say, maybe I said something in the earlier part of the conversation that just pissed them off so much that they can't possibly listen anymore. As far as I'm concerned, that's on them. If they can't, okay, maybe they'll turn it off for a minute, but they can't sit back for a second and go, okay, why did that piss me off? Is that something that should piss me off? Is it something that I need to work on there? Okay, maybe I can go forward and learn a little bit more. Or, okay, I can listen to something that pisses me off, but the rest of this conversation may very well be worth listening to. They can't hold those two things together. It's like a black and white kind of
Mhm.
thing. So, I mean, I think you're doing fantastically. And yeah, absolutely, you're going to piss some people off with this. And so am I, by saying the things that I've said. And you're going to walk into some people that will send you hate mail for this kind of stuff. That's just, if you don't have a thick skin to be able to take that, that's where people drop out of the public eye, because they can't stand the idea of having both, people that love them and people that hate them. So you'll have that.
Yeah, my concern is I'll get the people who don't like me before I get the people who do.
I
Or
had a
that's
little bit of that on my channel at first too. I had a lot of the far radical left um, trans people or detransitioners, or people that were just, wanting to be upset at me for some of the things that I was saying, because I hold more conservative views. But then once I got past that, the thing that exploded for me was that video I did about super straights are not transphobic.
Mhm.
And that ended up on a website, a super straight advocate website in France. And all of a sudden, it just like wildfire took off from there. People were, oh, thank you so much for putting this out there. I was beginning to think that trans people were, they hated me, and that I don't want to be called transphobic. I'm not transphobic. And it was crazy making for them. And I felt really bad for them. But then all those people came to the rescue, and I finally started to come by people that agreed with me. So at first it was a little rough. There were a lot of the naysayers, but then little by little it got better. So you might run into those people that hate you at first, but if you've got a good message and you're going through things well, you will find those people that agree with you wholeheartedly, and more of them than hate you. I can almost guarantee that.
Yeah, well, that's the hope. Because as I said in my intro, I think I don't know if I'm have of the right stuff to do this. I don't think because I'm trying not to dismiss much of anything. It's very hard to put up with what you perceive as being what I perceive as being both unreasonable but also something I can't just dismiss. If someone was completely unreasonable, then it would be okay. I think. Anyway,
Right.
um, yeah, and this is something actually. It's one of the things that I think is really important to do on my channel. Is there anything you want to know about how I see you? I haven't seen, I don't know you that well, so it's not.
Sure.
But yeah, I wonder if it's better to put it over to you.
Um, Mostly more than the gender question, because that I so much don't focus on, because again, that's not. I don't feel day to day like I'm trying to convince anybody of what I feel I am. I just am. So I don't ask people how they see me. That question comes about when there's the he, she back and forth pronoun and they're struggling. And then I can clearly see that they see me half in one camp and half in the other. And I don't usually go through exactly what it is, although that would be a fun conversation for me to have with people. But I kind of generally know the answer because I've been getting it most of my life, how people see me anyway. That the way I behave and think and speak is differently than any feminine presentation that I've ever had, however remote it was. So, more of what I want to know these days is how I'm coming off as far as skills that I've traditionally, or skills that I have in the past been weak with, which is empathy and being accommodating in conversation, not talking about myself so much, which I know that this conversation was mostly geared towards talking about me, but just in general that I am more mature, more empathetic, more rounded in that way. That I want to know that I'm improving in that way, and that people see me as accommodating and concerned in that way. So it's tough for you to get that impression of me now, because again, I've just been speaking at you this whole time. But yeah, if I were to ask anybody, it would be that.
I guess, I mean, I've watched quite a few of your videos. Um, I would say well, again, obviously you're just talking, so I can't say how you were. Yeah, but as far as I think you do a good job of, I don't know what you feel, but conveying concern with what people feel and why they feel it. There is an overarching cerebral feel, um, which is part of the reason we're here. And so that maybe you could warm it up a bit if you wanted to. Maybe, I don't know. As I say, I'm happy with it. Also, maybe it gives more of a masculine vibe that you might want to keep. Um, there is that tricky thing, is how can, and I think I've heard about it too. How, if you're trying to, for whatever reason, present yourself more one way, then it's hard to incorporate any of, I'm going to speak specifically of you. If you're trying to present yourself or express as much as possible what you feel is masculine, then when you find something feminine that you actually do feel as a part of you, potentially it's hard to put it out there because it feels like it's just wrecking the whole show.
Yeah, yeah. So finding the balance between being, what is just me, but taking and developing those in a healthy way, because it's easy to get out of balance with all of your natural strengths, because then you have natural weaknesses as well. So, not wanting to change what is essentially me, but just balance out where I've potentially been a little bit weaker, not trying to be something that I'm not, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
So I do try to be very, very vulnerable, which I think is a relatively feminine thing on my channel. I speak very intimately about some things, so that's you know, dispelling that whole toxic masculine thing of not being able to talk about emotions because you're a pussy or whatever. That's I don't subscribe to that. I think guys need to be able to talk about what they're feeling. If they can get in touch with that, great. So yeah, that's I try to just balance out my weaknesses.
Yeah, probably the subject of your channel also confuses me in that sense. Not that I feel confused, but I mean, it probably does feminize it without me realizing it. Um, yeah, it may be more of a as far as the tone, like the social mood, may be more androgynous if I was going to try and put a sex to it, um, which probably is what you want.
Yeah.
Um, I don't, for that matter, I don't know where I'm ending up in that direction because there's definitely, the things you're talking about, specifically the vulnerability thing, is something I aim to do. Um, I still haven't actually made these conversations as much about me as I intended to. Um, because to me, part of the crucial part of the equation in terms of integrating people who are generally unusual, and one could argue with whether that's a valid term. I think it is. I think people know what I mean. Is I don't just need to know about what it's like to be you and what it's like for you to interact with me when, if for example, not that this hasn't come up, but I wanted to know about your experience in the appliance store, and specifically me finding out what it's like for you to be you and interacting with other people and whether they say he or she and all that. It's also useful for you to know what it's like for me, either maybe in normal life, but particularly when I'm interacting with you. And then hopefully from this mess, we can actually come up with some sense of how we want to interact with other people more broadly. Um, and that's part of I mean, something I said, for example, to were you aware of the YouTuber Theron Meyer?
I'm not. No.
Okay, so Theron Meyer's a trans woman who was early on when Jordan Peterson was becoming famous and infamous. They talked both on a local TV show that's on YouTube. You can find it, TVO, um, and and then also because I think they hit it off so well, they did it on their own channel. They did videos and a few different things, and I was quite impressed with Theron Meyer as someone I'd like to talk to, and so I actually had a chance to meet Theron Meyer, and I said, um, I was hoping to do a podcast, and we were going to, but it fell through. That something I think I hear comes up is people will say that to be trans is to be fooling people, and they seem to resent being fooled. Now, obviously, there's degrees. If one is actually, on a dating website and trying to be secretive, which I understand not wanting to just put it out there, but just the same. Okay, there's that is one situation, but that's not what I'm talking about. And I said, never mind what uh, I'm not saying anything about what your intent is, but I do feel somewhat like I'm being fooled. That's not a criticism. That's just a feeling, and that's the sort of thing I want to talk about, to work through it, not just to present it, but to work through it. Now, in your case, I don't feel that, um, but that may be because I see you as, I'm telling you, even though you didn't ask. Uh,
No. Please. Tell me. Yeah.
I see you. I think, and again, this could change. This is not logic, right? This is just feelings. I see you as a different kind of woman or female. If there's a distinction, if you want to make there, you don't have to, like some people I think are more comfortable with going with a more biological based definition rather than more social wrapping. So I'm not making a distinction at this point. Um, And to me the most important question. This goes along with the pronoun thing of who cares what sex someone is. You deal with what their sort of social personality is. Um, Likewise, if we are interacting more regularly in actual space as opposed to over the computer, maybe you'd perceive me as interacting with you as if you were male. Like I don't know because I certainly don't get. I'm not being blown over with a feminine presence. So.
Right. 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 Right.
So
Well,
I really don't know as far as things that matter to you how you'd want to describe what I feel.
I mean, I don't have any particular lens through which I would ask that question because when you ask questions, inevitably what you're doing is you are framing an answer of sorts. So you're kind of constraining the information that you're getting, which I mean, of course, if you got to ask questions, you have to do that to some degree. So yeah, I don't necessarily want to plant anything there, and I just, if at all possible, just let people go off the deep end with whatever they feel they want to say, and oftentimes when they're in that, they circle around an idea until finally they hit on something because they're talking their way um, through their feelings to arrive at a conclusion. So that's why I would rather not ask certain pointed questions, because I don't want to lead the witness, as the court would say.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to just listen to people tell me what they think is relevant there, because that tells me more sometimes than any question I could particularly ask. And to the point about people being fooled, I have to bring up that the fool is somebody who assumes rather than asks questions. To be a fool, or to feel like you are being fooled, if somebody is not purposefully, misleading you or manipulating you, the fool is kind of on you, on that person, and so it's exhausting to constantly question that which we have come through life to a certain point, assuming, we autopilot things a lot so that we can move more quickly through the world. And, the pro of that is that we can move more quickly. The con is that we miss a lot of nuance and a lot of details and things that, because we assume something, is actually not that way. So, for example, we see somebody with facial hair and short hair and of somewhat decent stature. We go, okay, that's a biological male, but that isn't, for 1% of the population, that's not true, actually. And so, or less than 1% maybe. And yes, you can definitely feel misled if that person is dating you and goes to a certain point to say that they are male and they're not. But just in the general day-to-day, you wouldn't think to question if that person is biologically male, because you've autopiloted yourself to just get by in social context. But that feeling of being fooled is actually your responsibility, because you didn't ask that question. Not that you needed to, not that it was that important, but I guess the point that I'm getting at here is that people fail to take responsibility for their own emotions a lot. And they want to blame other people for those emotions when it's not often their fault. So.
Yeah, and it's tricky to figure out where is that line. I've certainly found this
Oh, very.
in uh, more romantic relationships, that there can be a great deal of debate over when does it make sense to say that this thing you did affected me, and when does it make sense to say that I responded to what you did in this way.
Right. Yep.
And I say it was a discussion. It's never been a discussion. It's been an
Yep.
argument. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, because I could imagine someone arguing that, well, what is normal, as in statistically generally the case, is you got male and you've got female, and so anyone who's fiddling around there, it's on them. They're the one doing that. But then my and I have some sympathy for that. I wouldn't make it as a loud argument though. But then I'd also think, well, but maybe that could change. Um, I had more to that thought, and I have lost it. Um, because, for example, I don't feel, maybe this is wrong, I don't feel like you're really too interested in what people think about you, until it actually, I mean, obviously it can matter, but I mean, like at the grocery store. Um, and so, partly because I think it sounds like what you've been working out has been much more psychological and personal. It hasn't been so much the social, how you're perceived. In fact, something I wanted to mention that you mentioned was that you did this thought experiment of, if you're the last person on the planet, how would you want to be? And you came up with your answer. Um, and if that's an accurate answer, that just for your own purposes would you prefer to be totally male, like if you could just do it, or
So that's an interesting question. So if I could snap my fingers and be, one or the other without all the complications, all the reality of it. So the first thing that comes to mind is that if any position that I occupied I can, there's pros and cons to it, period, end of story. So for me, there is, it would go a step further. I'll one up you on that actually, because I thought about this a lot. I would have it so that I could have a penis for sex and sex only, and then otherwise wouldn't bother with it because it is, as an external feature, it is a huge liability and a weak spot that I would not enjoy having day to day. And I don't envy guys having to deal with that extra. But as far as sexual activity goes, absolutely. I do wish that it was there. So if I'm going to be able to snap my fingers and say I could do one or the other, I'm going to go further and say I want more than that. I would want it just when I want it and not when I don't. So if that helps you at all, I'm not sure.
Okay, now this is definitely a question you don't have to answer.
Oh, I
But
probably will.
practically speaking, though, that would not necessarily be well received by the person you'd be applying it to.
Maybe, maybe not. As far as my wife goes,
Well, yeah, because I don't want to get involve your wife if
exactly. As
she's
far
not here,
as,
so that's
that
why I'm
goes,
asking it that way.
we've had this conversation, and I mean, if you want to go into fantasy elements of it, that is something that she would particularly enjoy. If it could be there for certain things and look a certain way and then not be, yeah, we've agreed as far as the fantasy realm goes, that would be something that she would very much enjoy. So, but the realistic constraints of that, the way that it would have to be here, um, it's much better fitting to just not bother with it at all. So,
Okay. It's interesting the people I choose to spend my afternoons with talking to.
yeah, the rabbit hole goes very deep there, Julian.
That's fine. So far, no regrets. Okay, I'm trying to think of a good way to wrap this up. As usual, I've got tons of questions I haven't asked. Um, I did want to mention that I still feel residual discomfort from telling you that I perceived you as a, a different kind of female. I just wanted to
Okay,
mention that I
tell me
actually
about it.
feel residual discomfort from that for people to consider, even though I'm smiling.
Well,
Uh,
I would, yeah. Well, it may because I, in case you haven't noticed, things that are a little bit difficult sometimes for me, I treat with comedy. I laugh a lot. So I don't do that in my videos often, but when there's a particularly awkward situation, like passing at the appliance store, there was lots of laughter in that video. So smiling and laughter is it's a stress reliever, and actually there's a biological mechanism behind that. If you ever care to do a little bit of research on it, smiling in chimpanzees is a sign of submission, a sign of tension easing. So when there's a conflict between two chimps, you will see the one who's the lesser one who wants to not start the fight will actually smile. So whether or not that's a threat in a lot of other animals, showing teeth is usually a dominant threat, at least with chimps anyway, and other primates like that. The showing of teeth in those scenarios is a stress reliever. So in any case, laughter, like for people like you and me, it's a tension release. So that makes sense to me. But I mean, feel free if you want to talk more about how like you feel kind of awkward about that. I can dispel that for you because I don't feel any awkwardness about that at all. Technically, it's 100% true, exactly how you are seeing me, just a very different kind of woman.
and I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. That is to say, I'm not sure that it doesn't actually match, I'm guessing here, how you'd like to be seen. Like, I almost feel like I'm actually, with you, more than perhaps anyone else, perceiving, only because you told me, right, on the street, I wouldn't have all this information, perceiving the biology and then what we're calling the gender on top. And I'm still getting to know the psychological components, so I still haven't figured that out. But I could imagine that settling to something. It's hard to tell. The thing is, too, I wonder if there's a difference in general, if there's a difference in general between how men and women deal with transgender people. Because
I'm sure there is.
here's
Yeah.
this theory. It could be you could just shoot it down. It's just a theory. But I wonder if men are so obsessed with sex that they just can't get over the biology as readily. It's
I
just
agree
too
with you.
important.
I agree with you. No, I agree with you 100%. Why would you waste any of your time on something that's not going to, you know, be the Darwinian uh, climactic event, which is reproducing as much as you possibly can. So you would not want to the reproductive aspect of it. Your genitals would be extremely important. And actually, I'm going to be doing a video about this very soon. That we have this taboo around saying that we are attracted to genitals like super straights. They dance around it, but what they really want to say is, no, I'm attracted to your penis or your vagina. Of course, you are more than your biological parts, but they don't want to say that because to them it seems so reductive and dismissing. And of course, the left will say, oh, that's so. I don't know. That's so whatever they say.
Old-fashioned.
Yeah, whatever it is. But that is the evolutionary biological mechanism, is that those were very important things. They were the single determinant visual factor that, yes, indeed, you were doing something that was reproductively productive. And so for men who are driven in that way, more so than women, I would think that, yeah, it is far more important to them to focus on genitals and having that be precisely what they expect, and they have a harder time dealing with it. Now, I can't speak to the guys that find themselves saying I'm straight, but yet I'm involved with the lady boys over in Thailand, where they get into relationships with them, and they don't have a problem with that lady boy just tucking their genitals, and they're okay with that. Maybe there is some bisexuality of those men going on that they're not willing to admit. I'm not really sure. That's a whole other discussion, but I think you're onto something 100%, that there is, for most people, to follow the biological markers for male, female, and especially. And people are afraid to talk about that because it seems reductive. But I think if we can just say, look, no, this is actually it. This is just on a hardwire level what I'm attracted to. But yes, we are so much more than that. And just move on from the discussion, like what you said. Say it out loud. Yes, I love your dick. Yes, I love your pussy. And that's sexually what I'm attracted to. Can we please move on?
Mm-hmm.
Then, okay, yes, you're right. We can move on. It's not just that. Phew, we're, more evolved conscious beings, thank goodness. But, to me, it just seems like it's that roadblock we just need to get over.
Yeah, I'll have to look up the super straight thing. I'd only heard of it as a joke. I didn't really know that it was a major thing or what
It's
the
a
deal is.
backlash. Yeah, it's a backlash that's happening because the trans activists are saying that trans men are men and trans women are women, and you're transphobic if you don't want to date or sexually be involved with either one of those. And no, it's not transphobia. It's called a sexuality, and that's not phobic in any way. And it drives me nuts that people in the trans activist community are trying to demonize these super straights. They call themselves super straights because they are saying that their sexuality is very much dependent on genitals without saying it. And it's a backlash because they're tired of trans people saying, no, you're transphobic if you don't want to date me or have sex with me. It's ridiculous.
I'm just trying to figure out. I'm not entirely satisfied with saying attracted to someone's genitals. I don't know that I'm attracted to genitals exactly, uh, and the preference more has to do with arousal. At least I would say from my point of view, it's not exactly the same thing as like.
I guess on a on a arousal level, we'll just say you are maybe attracted's not the right word.
But I mean, like, if you just put a vulva up on the wall, I wouldn't walk over to it.
That's right. No, I agree with you 100%. And I'll say, honestly, from my own perspective, that in general, I think genitals are pretty gross-looking things, male or female, doesn't matter. They're awkward as shit. But
it's context. Context is important.
Absolutely. And I know some guys out there who do have artwork of that. They find it very attractive. Fine, all right, whatever. That's whatever floats your boat, literally. But I would say in general though that it's like you said, an arousal thing. And so on a primitive level, we are finding attraction to that. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I'm just about done. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up just before we? I'm hoping we had talked about talking more in the future. We've got one date set. My feeling was other dates could occur, and So that's fine too. Is there anything else you want to ask me or?
I mean, at the moment, no. I mean, you might find that as you kind of marinate on this stuff, that there will be other things, deeper things that pop up. And of course, we can have other conversations in the future. We can set other dates for those. If you're anything like me, though, it takes a while to marinate on these things
Yeah.
and kind of, learn more and then come to some other questions. So, yeah, at the moment, we've covered a lot. There's, I'm sure, so much more to cover that there's nothing specific. I just like the organic flow of the conversation with occasional springboards from your questioning
Mm-hmm.
within there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I yeah. Um. Okay. Here's one thing I mean to ask everyone. I've got a couple of questions I should ask everyone. One is there anything you think I might be able to learn from you, or people might, but I'm saying me personally. You
Yeah,
seem much more independent psychologically than I am.
maybe. Yeah. I mean, independence always been something that I think I've seen myself as, um, with some toxic exceptions in my past. But yeah, I think a couple of things. What you're already doing, number one, which is learning to get comfortable with asking the uncomfortable questions so that you are not uncomfortable anymore. To talk to someone who kind of has lived between both worlds and has experienced that um, uncertainty from other people and how they perceive you. Um, you can just learn how to navigate those awkward situations, perhaps with some empathy and grace, really. And that you can learn from anybody who walks a minority life, you could say. So that being first and foremost. Secondly, how to have better relationships, intimate relationships, I think, between, let's just say, masculine and feminine. Let's say that you are traditional in the sense that you're attracted to the opposite gender of yourself. Not everybody is, of course. You have femme on femme and butch on butch, whatever. That's different. Um, but, the age old men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of thing that has caused relationship tension and trauma throughout the eons. Now I think we're getting to a point where it's not about survival for our species anymore. We're evolving into, a culture where it's more about thriving in the emotional and psychological sense. So in talking to somebody like me, I would hope as conversations perhaps continue further down the road that people can learn to have better intimate relationships, bridge that gap between the seemingly opposite masculine and feminine, and be happy and cooperate together in that way.
And you think you might have insight in that?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing more videos talking about the interplay of gender roles, masculine and feminine, and um, how to improve. For me, anyway, as a masculine person, recognizing some of my weaknesses, but also being able to speak from having been socialized in the feminine sphere, experiencing and empathizing with things that men just cannot possibly, like periods, menstruation, and hormones in that way. Um, so, yeah, bridging that gap a little bit. And I'll be talking more about, again, those types of videos on my channel as time goes on. I've got so many scripts and just one day a week that I can film and edit and get that out. So sometimes they come out in batches like they have been recently. But there will be more videos like that, what I mentioned, forthcoming.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, this is another question I aim to ask everyone. Do I have an accent?
Very, very, very slight. Very
How would
slight.
you describe it? Or make fun of it? Your choice.
How would I describe it? That is a fantastic question. Ooh. I mean, it is not typically Canadian, where there's not a bunch of A's and after everything that you say, or certain vowels being pronounced in certain ways. Um,
About.
like a boat,
About.
yeah, a boat in the house, things like that. It's not quite that serious, but yeah, it's only certain vowels. It's hardly noticeable, to be
Okay.
honest.
It's interesting to me because I realized a couple of years ago that, and it's an obvious observation, I just slow to notice it, that I'd meet people who had an accent as far as I was concerned, but they didn't know it, which I thought meant that must mean they don't hear a difference between how they talk and how I talk. So then I could be making the same mistake. Or not mistake, but I could be missing it. And so then it's, oh, well, that's interesting. And so since so much of this is about perspectives, I thought that it was a fun way to, it's in a way you always, foreign, to me, a different accent always has a foreign element to it. So if I'm talking to you and then I'm asking you, how do I sound weird? And it just, I like that as a way to end the show. Anyway, so
Yeah,
I
no,
only
no, it's
sound,
cool.
yeah, okay. Also, I was told by my last guest that an Iowa accent was the most accentless, whatever that
Yeah,
means. And so
Midwest.
I heard in a video that you said you came from Iowa. So I thought, okay, to me, I don't hear a difference between how you talk and how I talk. Like I might have noticed a word that was different, but I don't identify an accent.
Yeah, it is so very subtle. And I did some studying in college, cultural anthropology, so I can, generally speaking, I can pick up even the slightest of accents, and I'm pretty good at placing where they're from. So I can say that, yeah, yours on the dial of accents is way down. In fact, so much so that if you hadn't told me where you were from, I might have said, maybe not so much of an accent that's really detectable. So it's only because you told me that I can, okay, then there's little pieces here that I can see where that makes sense. So,
Hmm. Okay, well, I'm worn out. Um, Thank you very much for talking. I quite enjoy talking to you. I find despite some discomfort, I feel quite safe, which is the reversal of what you might think that it's you who would be potentially feeling unsafe, but I don't think you do that very often.
no,
Um,
that is not an experience that I can much relate to. Maybe it's stupidity or ego, you can call it. But no, I generally don't worry about those things, and I'm very happy to hear that you feel comfortable enough despite the discomfort. Because the change and learning can be very uncomfortable, and so I do my best to facilitate the easing of that with the conversation. The education to me is paramount. That the ultimate goal is to facilitate it in such a way that somebody learns something and becomes a better person.
well, it's very much appreciated, and I'm glad that we'll be talking again.
Yeah, me as well. I look very much forward to it. So see you
Yeah,
next time.
yeah. So I'll just to tell the people that we're going to be doing more of this kind of thing, and we're going to be bringing in Daisy from my previous videos if you've seen those, and it should be interesting. So
Yep,
stay
looking forward
tuned.
to that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Talk to you later.